Every python that these participants remove is one more python out of here. We sent one more out of the glades, but that's also one less thing that's just eating the glades.
Thousands of acres of Florida's most critical wetlands were recently drained, and the footage captured by field teams is beyond belief. It turns out that 20-foot predators have been using deep underground burrows as highways to move through the state undetected. These pythons and armored fish have wiped out nearly all small mammals in the area, creating a silent wasteland beneath the grass.
This jaw-dropping video shows a 115-pound snake doing just that. Its jaws stretched around a 77-pound white-tailed deer.
The air smells like copper and rot, and the mud holds a chemical secret that could trigger massive algae blooms. Everyone is obsessed with the restoration, but this discovery changes everything we know about the Everglades. Moving ground revelations. The smell hit the survey team before they even reached the drainage zone. For starters, the air was thick with the scent of rotting plants and a strange metallic tang, like copper pipes left in stagnant water. This was the Blue Shanti Flowway, a massive piece of the Everglades restoration project. Last year, officials drained thousands of acres of wetland here. They expected to see mud and a few struggling fish. What they actually found just days later triggered an emergency response that is still going on today. The ground itself appeared to be moving. Beneath the surface of the exposed mud, biologists discovered over 11,000 invasive creatures. These animals had been silently multiplying for years without anyone knowing. They found tunnel systems stretching 18 feet deep that had hollowed out the entire marsh foundation. Basically, the very floor of the Everglades was being eaten away from the inside. The team included Maria Vasquez, a senior wetland ecologist, and field technician Marcus Webb. Marcus has worked in the Everglades for 11 years, and truth be told, he had never seen anything like this. The August sun was baking the mud at 97 degrees. As the water dropped to just 4 inches deep, thousands of native fish were forced into tiny, shrinking pools. Their bodies were packed so tightly that the surface of the water looked like it was boiling. Marcus Webb wrote in his notes that one small pool, only 15 feet across, held an estimated 3,200 fish. Most were native species like bass and bluegill, but when the team reached the muddy edges of the banks, the story changed completely. Wedged into the walls of every pool were clusters of armored catfish. These are known as plecos. They are invasive bottom feeders covered in bony plates. Their scales scraped against each other as they shifted in the muck, making a sound like ceramic tiles being shuffled. What most people do not realize is that these creatures can breathe air from the atmosphere for up to 30 hours. While the native fish suffocated in the heat, the plecos just waited. They were perfectly comfortable in the mud, protected by their armor. On the second day of the survey, Maria Vasquez was taking photos when her boots suddenly broke through the ground into a void. The hole was 18 inches wide and went straight down. When the team sent a camera probe into the hole, they mapped over 340 feet of interconnected burrows in that one small section. The soil structure had been totally hollowed out. Carlos Menendez, a district engineer, looked at the footage and immediately asked for more help. He realized this was not just a fish problem. It was a structural collapse in progress. The burrows were destroying the root systems that hold the marsh together. Because the soil was full of these holes, native plants could not grow properly. The marsh was literally sinking in some spots. This changed how the water flowed through the entire area, making the restoration work almost useless. Up to 60% of the ground structure in the worst areas was gone. But as the crews looked into the deepest tunnels, they found something that made the catfish look like a small problem. Something much larger was using these underground tunnels as a secret highway. Secret tunnel hunters. 3 weeks after the drainage started, another crew was working on the Picooney Strand restoration project. They made a discovery that caused the whole site to be locked down. An equipment operator named James Fontaine was moving dirt when his excavator bucket hit a hollow space 6 feet below the waterline. When he pulled the bucket back, something moved inside. It was big and it was moving fast. Kristen Summers, a Python expert, arrived 4 hours later to lead the team. What they pulled out of that single hole over the next 2 days was shocking. They found 19 Burmese pythons living together. The total weight of the snakes was 847 pounds. The largest one was over 17 feet long and required 3 people to hold it. When they looked inside its stomach, they found the remains of a white-tailed deer. This key detail can shock people because it proves the pythons are not just hiding in the grass. They are living and hunting from deep underground. Kristen Summers described the tunnel network as a built habitat. There were multiple rooms that showed signs of being used for years. The team found piles of shed snake skins and bone fragments from old meals scattered everywhere. In her report, she noted that these animals are not just passing through. They have built a permanent underground world across the drainage basin. When the team used thermal cameras to look further, they saw heat signatures in other tunnels they could not even reach. Her low estimate was that another 30 to 40 pythons were living within 500 meters of that one dig site. The removal operation had to be stopped after 48 hours because it was too dangerous for the small staff. Those remaining tunnels were marked on a map that has not been shown to the public yet. Hands down, these snakes are the most effective hunters in the state. They have already eliminated 90% of the small animals like rabbits and raccoons in the areas where they live. Without those small animals, the whole food chain is falling apart. Predators that used to eat rabbits are now fighting over whatever is left. This is causing a ripple effect that is spreading across the state every year. As the water kept dropping, it created a predator pit. Frank Mazzotti, a scientist from the University of Florida, came to see it. In a hole the size of a tennis court, his team counted 287 alligators. The water temperature was 94 degrees and there was almost no oxygen left in it. The gators were coming from miles away to eat the thousands of fish trapped in the mud. Frank said he had never seen so much fighting in 31 years of research. Gators were snapping and rolling, making noises so loud they sounded like a construction site. While the gators were fighting on the surface, a much more invisible threat was waiting in the mud beneath them. The animals were scary, but the dirt itself held a poison that could destroy everything. Draining the past. While the giant snakes were getting all the attention, the engineers were worried about the chemistry of the mud. Carlos Menendez ordered the soil to be tested across the whole drained area. When the results came back a week later, they were worse than anyone thought. The levels of phosphorus in the top 6 inches of mud were 1,540 parts per million. To save the Everglades, the level needs to be 10 parts per million. That means the mud was 134 times more toxic than it should be. This is part of a long history of human mistakes. Back in the 1880s, a man named Hamilton Diston drained the Kissimmee River area to turn wetlands into farms. He moved 50 billion gallons of water. Then in 1948, the government started a huge engineering project with 800 miles of canals and 16 big pumping stations. It was called a success at the time, but it destroyed 1.5 million acres of the Everglades in just 20 years. That is half of the original system gone forever. Rebecca Thornton, a historian, has spent 15 years studying this. She says that every time they drain a new area today, they are doing an autopsy on 100 years of mistakes. The dirt holds on to chemicals that would be illegal to use today. It also holds on to pesticides that were banned in the 1970s. Now they are finding that invasive species have been using these contaminated areas to breed in the dark. The water treatment areas were supposed to clean the water, but they turned into incubators for monsters. When you drain a wetland, the mud hits the air for the first time in a long time. This causes the nutrients to release. When the area is filled with water again, all that poison flows downstream. Rebecca explained that when all that phosphorus hits a river, it acts like fertilizer in a bathtub. It causes giant blooms of green algae within days. The toxins in the water can end up being 500% higher than what is safe for people or animals. We saw how bad this could get during the 2021 Piney Point disaster. Engineers had to release 215 million gallons of dirty water to keep a dam from breaking. That caused a red tide that eliminated 1,500 tons of sea life. Millions of dead fish, dolphins, and manatees washed up on the beaches. The smell was so bad it could be felt for miles, and the tourism industry lost over $100 million. This is the risk every time the mud is disturbed. The team also found something else the public hasn't heard much about. They found massive groups of invasive snail eggs. These are island apple snails, and they grow as big as golf balls. They eat native plants faster than they can grow back. Even worse, they carry a parasite called rat lungworm that can make people very sick. The team found over 4,700 egg clusters. With up to 600 eggs in each, that is nearly 3 million snails waiting to hatch in just one small area. The restoration was supposed to show progress, but it showed an ecosystem that is rotting from within. Invisible poison surge. So here's the deal with the water. The Everglades is often called the river of grass, but today it is more like a series of plumbing fixtures controlled by humans. The discovery of the phosphorus levels in the mud has changed the timeline for the Blue Shanti project. Engineers are now scrambling to find a way to trap that poison before they let the water back in. If they fail, the surge of nutrients will head straight for the coast, potentially starting another massive algae crisis. It has been missing for years, but the natural flow of water is what kept the land healthy. Now the land is hollowing out. The armored catfish are not just eating the plants, they are physically removing the dirt. When the water returns, those 18-foot tunnels will fill up, but the soil around them will be too weak to stay put. This could lead to a total collapse of the marsh floor, turning a beautiful wetland into a series of deep, muddy holes where nothing native can live. The scientists are also worried about the bacteria in the water. The Florida Department of Health has already warned people about rising risks of infections. As the summer heat stays high, the stagnant water in these drained zones becomes a breeding ground for dangerous germs. Doctors are seeing more cases this year than usual. This makes the job for the field biologists even more dangerous. They are walking through mud that is literally full of poison and predators. What most people do not realize is that this restoration project costs $2.44 billion in this current cycle alone. It involves 16 different federal and state agencies. There is a lot of political pressure to show that the money is being spent well, but the biologists on the ground are seeing a different story. They are seeing an environment that is being attacked from every side. It is a war on invasive species, a war on chemical pollution, and a war against time. The invasive snails are adding another layer of trouble. Because they eat the plants that filter the water stays dirty even longer. This allows more phosphorus to move through the system. It is a circle of damage that is very hard to break. The teams are working around the clock to remove the egg clusters, but with millions of snails hatching, it feels like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. The sheer scale of the invasion is hard to wrap your head around. Even with all this bad news, the survey did find one thing that no one expected. Amidst the snakes, the toxic mud, and the hollowing ground, there was a sign that the Everglades is not ready to give up yet. Deep in the most damaged sections, the scientists found a secret that has been buried since before the 1948 drainage project began. This tiny discovery might be the only reason to keep hope alive for the future of the Glades. Hidden in the toxic mud was a message from the past that surprised every scientist on the team. In late 2023, Rebecca Thornton's team found something that almost didn't make it into the final reports. They were looking at the data from the drainage and found that invasive plants were actually dying off in some spots. In fact, there was a 43% reduction in bad plants where the water was moved out in a way that copied nature. But the real surprise was what started growing in their place. Native sawgrass and spike rush began to sprout all on their own. Is the government hiding how bad the Everglades really is? Drop your theory in the comments. Like and subscribe to see what else is hiding in the mud. We need answers.